1 minute was all it took to turn Westminster into chaos. As Keir Starmer stepped from his car outside Parliament, the silence of the morning was shattered by a wall of noise. Voices rose in unison, sharp and relentless, echoing across the historic gates. "Traitor! Traitor!" The word wasn't whispered, it wasn't muttered under breath. It was screamed with fury, cutting through the London air like a blade. This wasn't just political disagreement, this was a public rejection, raw and merciless, broadcast for the entire nation to hear. For a leader who built his image on controlled discipline and calm authority, the chants striking his name were more than an insult, they were a threat. A warning that his leadership was unravelling, not behind closed doors, but in front of the cameras, in front of the people, in the very heart of British democracy. Keir Starmer had faced hecklers before, but nothing like this. The moment his car turned toward Parliament, the tension was visible. Protesters were already lined across the pavement, their banners raised high, their chants growing louder with every passing second. "You sold us out!" shouted one group, their words cutting through the commotion. Others held signs that read, "Labour is lost and not in our name." But the chant that overpowered them all was simple and devastating. "Traitor!" It was relentless, repeated again and again until it drilled itself into the air like a siren. For a leader trying to project confidence in the run-up to a general election, this was more than embarrassing. It was humiliating. It was political theatre at its most brutal. Staged not in the Commons, but on the streets outside it. What made this moment different was who those voices belonged to. These weren't only Conservative supporters or fringe activists. Many of the faces in the crowd were once Labour loyalists, people who had knocked on doors, handed out leaflets and defended the party through decades of struggle. Now their loyalty had snapped. They no longer saw Starmer as their champion. They saw him as a man who had betrayed the principles they believed Labour once stood for. Brexit, Gaza, shifting alliances with figures like Donald Trump, every controversy that had haunted Starmer's leadership seemed to fuse together in that one word. Traitor. Inside his team, the silence was telling. Aides who once brushed off criticism now looked unsettled. They knew this was not an isolated outburst. Just weeks earlier, Starmer had been booed off stage in Southport, his words drowned out by anger from a crowd that should have been sympathetic. Now the backlash had reached Westminster itself. Parliament, the symbol of power, stability and authority, had become the stage for a rebellion against him. And unlike a hostile debate in the Commons, there was no speaker to quiet the outrage, no procedural rules to control the chaos. This was politics at its rawest. Witnesses described the atmosphere as volatile, like a spark waiting to catch fire. Some protesters brought megaphones, amplifying the chants so loudly that reporters blocks away could still hear them. Others stood silently, their expressions grim, their placards carrying words that needed no voice. "Not in our name. You betrayed us." Every message was aimed directly at the man walking past them. For Starmer, keeping his head high was the only option. He did not stop. He did not speak. He walked quickly towards the entrance, his jaw tight, his face expressionless. But to those watching, the silence said everything. Because this wasn't just about anger in the streets, it was about the optics. The video clips spread across social media within minutes. Millions watched as the leader of the opposition, once hailed as the man to unite Labour, was hounded by accusations of betrayal outside the very doors of Parliament. Memes appeared almost instantly. Hashtags calling for his resignation began to trend. Political commentators seized on the footage, replaying it on loop, dissecting his every movement. Was he calm under fire, or was he running from the people's voice? The interpretations differed, but the conclusion was the same. The chants had stuck. The word traitor was now welded to his name. The damage wasn't only outside. Inside Parliament, the noise still echoed faintly through the glass as he walked the corridors. Aides tried to push on with the day's schedule, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But there was no denying it. The entire country had just witnessed their leader being publicly humiliated. In politics, perception is everything. And the perception now was that Starmer had lost control, not of the opposition benches, not of the media narrative, but of his own people, the very voters who were once his strongest foundation. If he couldn't win them back, his road to Downing Street wasn't just in danger, it was collapsing beneath his feet. The backlash against Keir Starmer has not stopped at the gates of Parliament. What began with chants of traitor outside has now spilled into the very heart of Westminster itself. Inside the chamber, Labour MPs who were once firmly by his side now sit in silence, their faces pale, their loyalty shaken. Opposition benches jeer and roar as Starmer rises to speak, but it's not just the Conservatives or Reform MPs who are taking aim. Many within his own party are quietly sharpening their knives. Starmer, once hailed as the man who could steady Labour and carry them into the future, now finds himself cornered by the very people he claimed to lead. What makes this moment even more explosive is that it is no longer about a single scandal or a single decision. The word traitor echoes louder than any single accusation. It is a symbol of betrayal of a leader who has lost the trust of his base and of a party on the brink of collapse. As Starmer attempts to defend himself, citing policy achievements and painting a picture of progress, the chamber grows restless. His words sound hollow, disconnected from the reality playing out both outside Parliament and across the country. Protesters are not just chanting, they are gaining numbers. Reports begin to surface that demonstrations are forming simultaneously in Manchester, Birmingham and Leeds, with crowds holding banners branding him a traitor to the people, a puppet of the establishment, a leader who has betrayed the very working class voters Labour was built upon. For many watching, this is not just politics, it feels like history in the making. The tension is unbearable. What happens when a leader's legitimacy vanishes in front of millions? When chants of betrayal drown out his speeches, Britain is about to find out. Inside Westminster, rumours swirl like wildfire. Some MPs are already discussing leadership challenges, whispering that Labour cannot possibly survive the next election under Starmer. Others fear something even more dangerous, that if he clings to power, the anger outside could ignite into chaos, the likes of which Britain has not seen in decades. The police presence around Parliament grows heavier as the hours pass, but so does the fury of the crowd. Starmer is now a man at war on two fronts, against his political opponents inside the chamber and against his own voters outside on the streets. Every second, every chant, every headline only deepens the crisis. The question that hangs heavy in the air is simple, yet terrifying. How much longer can he hold on before the dam bursts? But if the fury of the public outside Parliament was shocking, what unfolded inside was even more explosive. Keir Starmer entered the Commons chamber trying to project an image of calm authority, yet the tension was so thick it was impossible to ignore. The chants of traitor still echoed faintly through the walls, carried in by the roars of protesters just beyond the gates. Members of Parliament, already on edge, turned their eyes on Starmer with a mixture of disdain, anger and betrayal. This was no ordinary session, it was an ambush carried out not by the opposition, but by voices within his own party. The very people who once stood beside him were now lining up against him. The opening moments were brutal. MPs rose to their feet, one after another, demanding answers about why Starmer had ignored warnings, why he had abandoned promises, why he had chosen secrecy over transparency. His responses, carefully worded, only fueled the fire. For every explanation he attempted, a louder accusation followed. "You've betrayed the voters," one Labour MP shouted. "You've sold out your party for your own ambition," another added. The Speaker struggled to control the chamber as the atmosphere boiled over. Starmer's face remained tight, his voice measured. But even his allies could see it. He was cornered. The man who prided himself on control now looked like a leader desperately fighting to hold the ground beneath his feet. The chants from outside merged with the roars inside. "Oh, traitor!" echoed again and again until it was no longer the cry of protesters alone. It was the cry of Parliament itself. Conservative MPs seized the moment, piling on with accusations of corruption, deceit and weakness. But the real danger came from Labour benches. A wave of discontent was rising against their leader, a tide of betrayal from those he thought were loyal. Starmer, once celebrated as the man who would steady the party after years of turmoil, now stood accused of dragging it into chaos. The chamber had become a battlefield and the attack showed no sign of stopping. Then came the moment that stunned the entire nation. An MP from Starmer's own front bench stood and declared that Labour had lost its soul under this leadership. The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the air as the silence that followed seemed to last forever. Starmer's eyes narrowed, but the blow had landed. It was the kind of betrayal no leader can easily recover from. And then, as if on cue, another MP added fuel to the fire, saying that Labour's future could not be tied to a man who had forgotten the people who put him in power. The backbenches erupted with shouts of approval. The rebellion had gone public and there was no turning back. Viewers watching live could feel it. The humiliation, the collapse of authority, happening in real time. Starmer tried to shift the conversation back to policy, to paint himself as a man with a plan, but no one was listening. The accusations had grown too strong, the anger too deep. The Speaker called for order repeatedly, but the chamber had slipped beyond control. Parliament was no longer debating, it was tearing itself apart. And yet what made this moment even more damning was the way it exposed the fractures within Labour. For weeks, whispers had spread of secret meetings, hushed conversations in corridors, shadow plots forming in the background. Now those whispers had erupted into reality. Labour MPs, furious with their leaders' handling of scandals, deals and broken promises, had decided enough was enough. The showdown had come and they were not holding back. Outside, the protesters grew louder. Inside, MPs clashed with unrestrained fury. Starmer stood in the eye of the storm, his authority crumbling by the second. No leader wants to face boos from the public, but to face rebellion from your own side, that is political death. The spectacle was devastating, the humiliation complete. Britain watched as its Prime Minister, once hailed as a figure of stability, was branded with one word that could end his career forever: traitor. The chaos inside Westminster was only the beginning. As the news spread that the Supreme Court had intervened directly against the Prime Minister, Britain itself began to shake. Crowds poured into the streets, some cheering the ruling as a victory for justice, others furious that an unelected court could topple an elected leader. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, anger and fear. What happens when the legal system collides head-on with the political machine? Britain had never faced such a storm in living memory. Starmer, now cornered, tried to rally what was left of his supporters. But every word he spoke only deepened the cracks in his party. Loyal MPs were resigning one after another, some in quiet shame, others in loud rebellion. Shadow cabinet members who once praised him now turned their backs, whispering that his downfall was inevitable. In Parliament's halls, the whispers grew louder. Starmer is finished. But here's where the story gets darker. With Starmer weakened, a brutal power struggle began. Figures within Labour saw an opportunity not to save the party, but to seize it for themselves. Old rivalries reignited. Ambitions that had been hidden for years burst into the open. Who would inherit the broken throne of Labour? Would it be Angela Rayner, fighting for survival after her own controversies? Would it be one of the rising younger MPs eager to distance themselves from Starmer's failures? Or would it be a return of the old guard, desperate to reclaim control before the entire movement collapsed? Meanwhile, the Conservative opposition smelled blood. They demanded Starmer's immediate resignation, branding him the most corrupt Prime Minister in modern history. Nigel Farage and Reform UK seized the moment, declaring that Britain had been betrayed and only a new political revolution could save it. Across the media, one question dominated every headline. Was this the end of Starmer or the beginning of something even more dangerous? And then came the ultimate shockwave. Sources from inside Buckingham Palace revealed that the king himself was being briefed on the crisis. For the first time in generations, the monarchy was preparing to step into active politics, not by choice, but by necessity. The palace feared that the collapse of Parliament could spiral into national instability, even riots. If the Prime Minister refused to resign, if Parliament failed to act, then royal powers, rarely spoken of and almost never used, might have to be invoked. The weight of history hung heavy in the air. Was Britain about to witness the dissolution of Parliament by royal decree? International reaction only added fuel to the fire. Washington and Brussels issued cautious statements warning of democratic instability in the UK. Markets trembled, the pound fell sharply. Foreign investors began to pull money out, fearing that the British government might collapse entirely. Every headline screamed crisis, every moment felt like a countdown. But Starmer did not bow. He gave a defiant speech from Downing Street, declaring the Supreme Court's ruling a political ambush. He insisted he would continue to govern no matter the cost. His words sent shockwaves through the country. Was this resilience or arrogance? Was he defending democracy or destroying it? Opponents called it a constitutional meltdown. Supporters called it bravery. But one thing was undeniable. Britain was now entering uncharted waters. No one knew how this would end. Would Parliament rise up and force Starmer out? Would the King take the extraordinary step of dissolving government? Or would Starmer cling on, dragging the entire nation down with him? The crisis had gone beyond scandal. It had become a battle for Britain's very soul.